In January 2024, a vessel longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall pulled out of Miami carrying nearly 10,000 people, more than some Caribbean islands have residents. Every one of them will spend a week surrounded by engineering so advanced and so well hidden that most would never know it existed. Because behind the water slides, the infinity pools, and the 20 decks of all-inclusive paradise, a crew of 2,350 was quietly running something that has more in common with a nuclear submarine than a vacation. A floating city with its own power grid, its own water supply, its own hospital, and a waste system cleaner than most countries allow on land. This is the icon of the seas, $2 billion, 250,800 gross tons. And almost every system on board was designed to do at least two jobs at the same time, starting with a 52-foot art installation you see here that 10,000 guests walk past every single day without realizing it's the only thing keeping the deck above their heads from collapsing. For 25 years, every Royal Caribbean promenade felt like a shopping mall, dark, enclosed, no windows. When Icon's designers wanted floor-to-ceiling glass walls for the first time, the kind of ocean view you'd expect in a Manhattan penthouse, they hit a wall, literally. The steel beams holding up the staterooms and Central Park on Deck 8 ran right through that space. Rip out the beams and the upper decks have nothing to stand on. Keep them and the promenade stays dark. So they poured all that structural load into a single sphere of finished steel and wrapped it in kinetic art. The Pearl carries the weight of 3 decks above it while letting natural light flood a space that spent a quarter century in the dark. One object, 2 problems solved. But the Pearl only handles one space. The rest of the vessel has a much bigger issue. 7,600 people trying to use it at the same time. Put that many guests on a single ship without a plan, and you get hour-long waits at the buffet, pool decks so packed you can't find a chair, and a promenade that feels like a subway platform at rush hour. Icon's answer is 8 neighborhoods, self-contained zones that break the crowd into small groups small enough that nobody feels like they're sharing a vessel with a small town. Chill Island has 4 of the 7 pools, plus a swim-up bar that stays packed from noon until midnight. Thrill Island has the water park, the Flow Rider surf simulator, and a zip line 154 feet above the ocean. Surfside is built for families with young kids. Carousel, splash pad, arcade, and a dedicated eatery, so parents don't have to drag a 5-year-old across 8 decks for chicken nuggets. The Hideaway is adults only. Suspended infinity pool, hot tubs, and a DJ spinning tracks by the bar with a beach club vibe. You could fill every cabin, pack every pool, book every restaurant, and the guy at the Swim and Tonic bar in Chill Island might never cross paths with the family on the Flow Rider in Thrill Island. Same vessel, different worlds. People who sailed spring break voyages with 7,300 guests said the pool deck felt spacious, the promenade felt open, and the restaurants had seats. These neighborhoods don't just work. They work so well that the biggest problem left on the ship is what to do with the empty space above them. Decks 16 and 17, open air, high up, too windy for lounging, too exposed for dining. Those 6 water slides on the top deck, including the tallest drop slide and the first open freefall slide ever built at sea, turned dead square footage into Icon's most photographed feature. One of them drops you through a trap door in the floor. You stand on a platform, a countdown plays, and the bottom disappears. 17,000 square feet of rides stacked up on top of each other, keeping thousands of guests occupied in one spot while the pools, restaurants, and bars below can breathe. But all of this, the glass walls, the pools, the whirlpools, 40-plus kitchens cooking at once, runs on electricity, and Icon doesn't plug into anything. 14 decks below the water slides. Behind doors nobody on vacation has any reason to open. Sit 6 engines the size of 2-story houses. Pool heaters, elevators, ovens, lights, air conditioning across 20 decks, all running off these 6 machines at the same time. The generators alone produce 46 megawatts. The propulsion system stacks another 84 on top. Enough electricity to run a small city, generated in real time, while that city cruises through the Caribbean at 22 knots. Producing that kind of power on a vessel that has to stay at sea for weeks takes serious hardware. 3 Wärtsilä engines, 14 cylinders each, 245 tons apiece, 40 feet long, and 3 more smaller units at 203 tons and 34 feet. Picture something heavier than a blue whale, longer than a school bus, and bolted to the keel. Now picture 6 of them rumbling away while guests 300 feet above are arguing about whether to try the sushi or the Italian place. And feeding engines that size is its own engineering problem. These machines burn liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Take natural gas, cool it to a negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, and it squeezes down into a liquid 600 times denser than the gas that comes out of your kitchen stove. 2 cryogenic tanks here hold the supply, each weighing 307 tons, insulated so heavily that negative 260-degree fuel stays liquid while the Caribbean sun bakes the deck above. Those tanks weren't even built in Finland. They were fabricated in a separate shipyard in Rostock, Germany, loaded onto barges, and towed across the Baltic Sea to the Meyer-Turku yard where the hull was waiting for them. The engine room itself, generators, LNG tanks, fuel systems, was assembled on a single floating unit in Germany, then towed to Finland and slotted into the hull like a drawer sliding into a desk. 2 countries, 1 power plant, and it burns about 20% cleaner than standard ship fuel while producing almost 0 sulfur. But the clever part isn't what the engines burn, it's what they throw away. Most vessels dump engine exhaust heat straight overboard. Hundreds of degrees of thermal energy wasted. What most marine engineers didn't expect was that Icon's designers would capture it. And by the time that heat dissipates, it's already made your drinking water, warmed the pool you're floating in, washed your sheets, and boiled the water for the pasta the chef is cooking 3 decks above the engine room. 1 heat source, 4 jobs, 0 extra fuel. Waste heat is one problem the engine solved. Here's another one that nobody expects a cruise ship to tackle. Icon takes last night's dinner scraps, leftover packaging, everything guests threw away yesterday, heats it in a sealed chamber until it breaks down into gas, and feeds that gas right back into the power grid. The technical name is microwave-assisted pyrolysis. The practical name is the garbage-powered generator. First one ever installed at sea, where every system has to work while the floor is moving. The leftover carbon gets pelletized and shipped to farmers as fertilizer. Leave it to the world's most complicated floating object to invent a new way to take out the trash. All of it, the engines, the waste heat capture, the garbage generator, feeds into a single electrical grid. And keeping that grid balanced is a full-time job. The chief engineer manages it 24 hours a day from a control room buried in the hull. Give too much power to the air conditioning and the vessel slows down. Push too hard on speed and the guests start sweating through Caribbean heat. It's comfort versus momentum, all day, every day. And nobody upstairs has a clue it's happening. All that power has to go somewhere, and where it goes next is under the hull. This vessel has no rudder, and it can spin 1,198 feet of steel in its own length inside a harbor. 3 ABB Azipod units make that possible. Each one is an electric motor sealed inside a pod that hangs beneath the stern you see here, connected directly to a propeller. No shaft running through the hull, no gearbox, nothing between the motor and the water except thrust. 20 megawatts per pod. Each one swivels a full 360 degrees. Point it left and the vessel goes left. Point it backward, it stops. Add 5 bow thrusters at 4.8 megawatts each up front, and the captain can park this thing like a Camry, sliding it sideways into a berth while tugboat captains watch from the dock, wondering why they bothered showing up. Most ports don't even need to send tugs anymore. Azipod propulsion has been on Royal Caribbean ships since 1999, but Icon scales it to a size the original engineers never imagined. 3 pods, 60 megawatts of propulsion, moving 250,000 tons of steel with the precision of a sports car in a parking garage. Steering, though, is the easy problem. Staying upright is the hard one. Take every piece of steel in this vessel, crush it into a solid block, and drop it into the ocean. Sinks immediately. Steel is about 8 times denser than water. So how does something made of steel float? Because it isn't solid. It's thousands of sealed compartments filled mostly with air. Cabins, corridors, engine rooms, void spaces, ballast tanks. The hull pushes aside more seawater than the vessel weighs, and that displaced water pushes right back. Archimedes figured this out in a bathtub 2,200 years ago. The engineers in Finland just scaled it up to something longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall. Now picture a building 250 feet tall balanced on a foundation only 31 feet deep. That's the ratio above and below the waterline. What the guests lining the observation deck for sunset photos don't realize is that the ship is already correcting for their weight before they've even finished walking. Every wave, every wind gust, every time 3,000 guests crowd to one side for a sunset photo, the center of gravity shifts. Get it wrong and the upper decks roll hard enough to turn furniture into projectiles. Dozens of ballast tanks handle that with brute force. Thousands of tons of seawater pump between tanks automatically, rebalancing the weight faster than the ocean can upset it. 3,000 guests rush to portside. The pumps are already moving water to starboard before the tilt registers. The system adjusts for everything: fuel burn, pool water levels, how many people are eating dinner versus standing on the observation deck. It never stops recalculating. For bigger problems, open ocean swells or storms, active stabilizer fins extend below the waterline. They're massive underwater wings, angled by hydraulic actuators thousands of times per minute based on gyroscopic data. The fins generate hydrodynamic lift in the opposite direction of every roll, fighting the ocean in real time. Without them, the upper decks would be unlivable in moderate seas. With them, guests on Deck 20 barely notice a swell that would have older vessels pitching rail to rail. Even the shape of the hull is pulling double duty. A parabolic bow, first ever on a cruise ship, curves differently than the traditional bulbous shape below the waterline, smoothing the ride and cutting fuel burn at the same time. The accountants love it as much as the engineers. At full speed, about 22 knots, stopping takes over a kilometer. The captain starts braking miles before port. You don't stop something this size on a dime. But none of that matters if the people inside can't eat, drink, breathe, and get off in an emergency. 3 days out of Miami, the nearest hospital is a helicopter ride away, if the weather cooperates. The nearest fire department doesn't exist. Neither does the nearest grocery store. For 7 days, everything that keeps 10,000 people alive has to come from inside the hull. The most basic human need is water, and the most visible system on the ship is the one producing it. Those desalination plants from the engine section, they're covering drinking, cooking, showers, laundry, and pool maintenance for the entire vessel, every hour, every day. On a hot Caribbean afternoon, the desalination system is working harder than anything else on board except the engines themselves. If the reverse osmosis membranes go down, Icon carries emergency reserves. Nobody wants to find out what happens when you run out of fresh water 3 days from Miami. Water keeps people alive. Food keeps them happy. And on a vessel this size, unhappy guests are a crisis all their own. 60,000 meals per day across more than 40 restaurants, cafes, and bars. That's more meals than most restaurant chains serve across an entire city. During turnaround, the crew has exactly 6 hours. Not 8, 6. In that window, while 5,610 guests walk off and 5,610 new ones walk on, loading crews haul tons of produce, meat, seafood, dairy, and dry goods through service corridors hidden behind the walls. Every pallet has a slot. Every freezer has a deadline. Miss the window and the 4 o'clock sailing leaves with empty walk-ins. Forklifts rolling past laundry carts, rolling past room service prep stations, all of it choreographed down to the minute because the next sailing leaves at 4 whether the walk-in freezers are stocked or not. And if all of it moves through a corridor, most guests don't know it exists. The crew calls it I-95. It runs bow to stern, connecting every kitchen, storage room, laundry facility, and crew quarter. A hidden highway behind the scenery. Crew members commute through it on foot, sometimes on scooters, dodging food carts and housekeeping trolleys, while guests on the other side of the wall browse the shops on the Royal Promenade without a clue. You could walk from bow to stern without crossing a single guest area. And while you're eating king crab in the dome lounge, a chef on the other side of those walls is running the operation from a control room with screens showing every station, every dish, every second of timing. Food and water go in. What comes out is a problem most people never think about, until you multiply it by 10,000. Icon handles every drop of sewage, gray water, and solid waste on board. The water that comes out the other end is cleaner than what most cities pump into their rivers. Near coastlines and coral reefs, the rules get even stricter. Zero discharge. Not a drop goes overboard. The vessel produces treated water so clean it could chemically be released anywhere, but in protected marine zones, even that isn't allowed. Those are the slow building problems, the ones you can see coming. The fast ones are worse. Below the guest decks, a full hospital runs around the clock. ICU beds, an operating theater with equipment capable of emergency surgery at sea, X-ray machines, a pharmacy ready for cardiac events, broken bones, allergic reactions, and the norovirus outbreaks that can rip through a vessel this size in 48 hours. The medical staff includes doctors and nurses trained in everything from trauma to tropical medicine. Because when you're 3 days from the nearest port, a helicopter evacuation costs a fortune and only works if the weather cooperates. And tucked out of sight, holding cells. 3 days out, you can't exactly call the police. But the scenario every crew member trains for and nobody wants to picture is fire. Middle of the ocean, no help coming, ever. Icon carries its own fire brigade on every deck. The hull is cut into fire zones with bulkhead doors that slam shut the moment sensors pick up smoke or heat. If everything were to go wrong at once, every person on board can be off the vessel within 30 minutes. Lifeboats, life rafts, and evacuation slides that deploy from the hull like the emergency chutes on a jetliner. The pools and water slides get the photos, but the vast majority of that $2 billion price tag went to everything underneath them. And the whole point was to build it so well that no one ever has to think about it. So why spend that kind of money? Royal Caribbean's first quarter 2025 numbers tell the story. Total revenue per guest per day across the fleet, $290.45. That breaks down to $199.30 from tickets and $91.15 from onboard spending. Drinks, specialty dining, excursions, the casino, the spa, Wi-Fi, and professional photos at every port and formal dinner. Multiply that by 5,610 guests at double occupancy, 7 days, 52 weeks a year out of Miami. Run those numbers, and you understand why someone wrote the check. But here's the question. How do you get guests to spend $91 a day when they've already paid for the ticket? Remember those 8 neighborhoods? Every zone has food, drinks, and paid experiences within arm's reach. Guests don't wander the vessel looking for something to buy. They're already standing next to it. That solves the revenue side. The cost side is where the real math kicks in. A vessel twice the size doesn't cost twice as much to run. Icon carries 2,350 crew, roughly the same as vessel's half its tonnage. The LNG system and waste heat recovery make it 24% more efficient than international regulations require. Port fees barely budge with size, but guest capacity nearly doubles. Wider margins on every voyage. A vessel this size can generate enough revenue per year to start paying back its construction cost faster than most commercial real estate. That's why Royal Caribbean already has 4 more Icon-class hulls on order. Star of the Seas launched in 2025, Legend of the Seas arriving in 2026, Hero of the Seas in 2027, and a 5th slotted for 2028. They're not building a fleet, they're building an armada. And every one of those ships starts the same way, in a finished shipyard with a puzzle. 900 days. That was the build window at Meyer Turku, and the clock started the moment the first steel was cut. 201 prefabricated steel blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, some arriving with wiring, plumbing, and furniture already installed, assembled in a building dock like the most expensive jigsaw puzzle ever attempted. A digital twin modeled every weld, every pipe run, every conduit in 3D before a single torch was lit. When a block arrived at the dock, laser systems verified its position against the virtual model. Tolerances tighter than the width of a pencil lead. Over 1,000 suppliers from multiple countries fed components into a single yard. And in December of 2022, the dock flooded and the unfinished vessel touched water for the first time. It floated perfectly because it had already floated perfectly thousands of times inside a computer months before the gates opened. What came out on the other side is a vessel where a steel sphere doubles as the world's largest kinetic sculpture, where engine exhaust heats swimming pools, where garbage becomes electricity, where thousands of guests spend a week at sea and somehow never bump into each other. The best engineering disappears. You walk through the Royal Promenade at night, the pearl glowing, kids running past on their way to the water slides, and nobody thinking about the ballast tanks underneath their feet or the Azipod motors spinning under the stern. That's the point. You only see what it makes possible. Icon moves 10,000 people, but there's a vessel that moves $10 billion worth of cargo in a single voyage, powered by one engine so large it has to be built inside the ship. That story is here. Bye for now.